Howdy, and welcome to the Boundless Book Club, the podcast that knows no bounds and dallies in the stories of all nations. Today, we are lingering in the literature of the United States of America, just in time for its 244th birthday. From the Emirates Literature Foundation in Dubai, you are here with me, Ahlam,
and me, Andrea.
We will be joined shortly by one of our favorite American authors living in the UAE, Avni Doshi.
And now we've got Avni Doshi on the line, as they say. Avni's spectacular debut, Burnt Sugar, was shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year, and it was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year. But today, she's joining us to offer her top tip of what you should be reading this 4th of July. Avni, it's so nice to see you. Welcome to the Boundless Book Club again.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be back.
What would you recommend that we should all be reading this 4th of July?
I was thinking about books that would give a sense of, one particular kind of experience of America. And I thought immediately of Jhumpa Lahiri's novel, The Namesake. I came into contact with Jhumpa's work for the first time when I was at university in New York at Barnard College, which is, funnily enough, where she went to college. And while I was there, her first book, The Interpreter of Maladies, was, I think it won the Pulitzer Prize. Huge deal, and everybody that was like the first time I came into contact with her work, and I was just so struck by this particular story. And again, it's not the only story of the immigrant experience, but this particular telling, or her kind of telling of the experience of Indian immigrants and trying to find their path, trying to find how to belong, a question of the which we assimilate, how much we can assimilate, and how much do we push back against that assimilation and cling to our own sense of home. These questions of what it means to belong, and how perhaps for immigrants and for certain communities, belonging is like, very elusive. It's something that you can never really capture. It's something you can never really hold on to for very long. And maybe that is part of a greater human experience. So these were some of the things that I immediately encountered with her work, and they've kind of stayed with me. And I've followed her career, and I'm actually currently reading Whereabouts, which is her new book, which is absolutely brilliant. She's again now reinventing herself and thinking and writing in Italian, and now translating her own work into English. So I think her intellectual journey and this idea of belonging, whether to a place or to a language, it's constantly evolving and shifting. But The Namesake was particularly interesting for me because, well, first of all, The Interpreter of Maladies was a book of short stories. And with The Namesake, I think it was her first novel. And so just the experience of seeing these, multiple generations in this novel making sense of what America is to them personally, what America is to them collectively as a family, and how that is negotiated not only from within the family with the greater world, but within, between members of the family. It's a constant negotiation, and it's almost a conversation that takes place across time and through generations. That really is one of the things that fascinated me about this book.
So is there one central protagonist, or are there multiples?
So Gogol is kind of the main protagonist. And so his parents both moved to the US. They have an arranged marriage, and they moved from Bengal in India to the US. And, those initial scenes of his mother's first experiences in the US, I think really struck me, the loneliness. There were just so many layers to her loneliness when she moved to the US, because she was a stranger to this new country, but also a stranger in many ways to the man she married, because she had an arranged marriage, only knew her husband for a matter of, I believe, I don't remember exactly, but I think a matter of weeks, when we're introduced to her. And there's just this loneliness and this longing, and at the same time, she gets pregnant quite soon, and we even feel this alienation from her own body, from the system in which she finds herself. She's in the hospital, and she doesn't know how to relate to the nurses, how to understand the hospital system. She's having pregnancy cravings, and she can't find the perfect ingredients to reproduce the foods that she misses so much from home. So I think, Gogol's parents are very central to the novel, but then we move on to kind of really follow his experience very closely as, this first generation born in America, and what that is like, and how he has to kind of make sense of the past and where his parents have come from. And yet at the same time, he can never fully know and experience their experiences, but how, through understanding himself, and actually, unfortunately, through the loss of his father at the end of the book, he kind of begins to reconnect with his identity in various ways. Although I think, it's kind of, there's a kind of sadness, and there's a sense that desire to connect there's never really a completion. It's never fully met in a lot lot of ways.
Wow. So I never read The Namesake, but I'm reading.
Oh gosh, I hope I haven't ruined it for you.
No, but I'm gonna go order it right now, and I'm gonna read it after Whereabouts. But The Namesake turned into a film as well. Have you watched the movie?
I have. I actually think it's an excellent movie. I'm a big fan of Mira Nair, who is the director of the film. It's actually, I think, one of my top, I would say, 2 or 3 films of hers. I think it's a really beautiful movie, really beautifully acted. And I think it captures, some of that loneliness, some of that nostalgia, some of the strangeness of existing between 2 cultures, and kind of straddling these 2 different worlds. I think she does a really brilliant job of pinpointing those different feelings and images.
And it's amazing what it means to be an American, or a part of the American experience. Like the story that you're talking about is very much that immigrant family, and then the next generation of raising their children and holding on to identity. Andrea's book was very much about that land of opportunity. I think the boys who lived in the US going back home to bring a wife that will just take care of them and cook for them, and sort of the wife just viewing that as the land of opportunity and their ticket out of the less fortunate life that they live. Or the book that I was talking about, which is about how large America is, and the different communities that live within the US, and the different lifestyles that they live. The sort of my story was about a Mormon family, and the sort of closed off life that they lived within Bucks Peak in Idaho. And there's so many different experience to the American experience, isn't there? And you, Avni, yourself, I mean, you are American too.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things I found really fascinating about The Namesake. I hadn't seen an experience of Indian immigrants written in this particular way that felt very familiar to me, in the sense that I could imagine my parents into a similar situation. Like, I know my mother also had an arranged marriage and moved very soon after to the US, didn't know a soul. And, one of the things she would always tell me is, I just used to wake up every day and cry. It was fascinating to see how common I think that is in so many ways. I mean, especially to see it in literature, it kind of opens up the experience, creates a kind of universality around it, makes it kind of more acceptable in a lot of ways to talk about. And at the same time, there was something so deeply foreign to me when I read Jumpa's book, because she speaks about a very specific Bengali experience. And, Bengalis have this way, my family is Gujarati, and so Bengalis have this very specific way of naming. They have the kind of the proper name, the name that you're known by in public. And then there's this other name that you have that's your name inside the home, and how that's again another way of negotiating identity, and how that kind of gets translated in America. And I think that's one of the kind of journeys the protagonist is on, like, who is he really? Which name should he go by? And even with language, I think when you grow up in a house where multiple languages are spoken, like so many Americans do, it creates a kind of split in your experience. And I know for me, and I've heard Jhumpa Lahiri speak about this on podcasts, as she's gotten older, her relationship to Bengali there's a kind of a gap now, like a distance. She's perhaps not as fluent as she once was. I have a very similar experience with my parents, with my mother tongue, if that's what you want to call it, where I feel, that this fluency has been lost. And so there's kind of like this split almost in consciousness, where you can have these memories of childhood. And in a lot of ways, I think language and experience, they're so connected. Language kind of seeps into your experience of a moment. And I wonder, how, if there is a kind of split in my own experience of my childhood, let's just say, and my experience of the moment now, because, I spoke primarily Gujarati as a child, and now my Gujarati is kind of, I don't know, the Gujarati of a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old. And, I'm an English speaker, and that's kind of my medium of learning and of writing and of thinking. And so I wonder how then language itself distances you from your past experiences, and perhaps from the experiences of your parents. And I think that's like a very common feeling for a lot of Americans, because we have this gap. It's almost this communication gap that occurs when you kind of step foot in America, and the next generation is now is kind of embedded in English. I think that adds another layer to the immigrant experience that's quite specific. Immigrants who are coming from non-English speaking backgrounds.
I have a question, because the US is such a land of immigrants. In your book, the mother character feels really isolated, and in my book, the main character is so isolated and feels so alone. But their experience is so shared and universal. And I was wondering, growing up with foreign parents in the US, did you feel like that was a shared experience with the other kids in your school, that you were all Americans, but with various heritage from different places? Or did you feel like you were out of place?
I went to school primarily Jewish, and I think everybody there kind of shared a common, and I think there were no other like Asians. I think there were no people, there were no other students of color probably until I was much older. So for the I would say it, like initially for many years, I think I was the only like brown student. And my parents were different, because I think, even though, there were students of different, perhaps their backgrounds were different, either they were white, or then they were all, mostly they were all from this kind of Jewish background, a shared Jewish background. And most of them, their parents or their families had been in the US. This was probably like a second or third generation. And so, my parents spoke with an accent. My parents were actually not, they were not that interested in in necessarily assimilating. There were certain ways in which they were, and then there were certain ways in which they weren't. And now I think back on that, and I find that's quite interesting. And I think it's something that adds a sort of richness to my own view of the world. And I'm actually now kind of grateful for it. But I think at the time when you're a child and all you really want is to sort of fit in, it's a little strange to have your parents be the only ones that speak in an accent. It's a little strange to, have your house smell a little different because the food you cook and the spices you use are different. And it's kind of sad not to really celebrate Christmas or have a Christmas tree when everyone else does. And nobody knew what Diwali was, for example, when I was growing up. It was difficult to kind of mark who I was in the face of who everyone else was. And there's a way in which you want to share, but then being the only one and being someone who's different, you also kind of want to, in a sense, diminish the differences as much as you can. So yeah, I think that for me, we never really had a community where we were all kind of experiencing something very similar. I guess I felt quite alienated as a child, and maybe that's why I turned to books.
It's you just have to share. It's such a tragedy when I look back, but in my school, it was a terrible insult for the kids to say that your house smells of spice. When kids said that to me, I was like, "Oh my God, my mom's an immigrant."
Yeah,
because it was like such a bad insult that your house smells funny.
Yeah, of course. No, absolutely. Anything that was different, even your lunchbox, right? Even you brought your lunchbox to school, and if you opened it and there was, you wanted the most simple, tuna sandwich, not even tuna, that was probably also too exotic, like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that just had no smell. You wanted to just kind of fit in your body shape, the texture of your hair, all of that. I think you just did not want to stick out at all. And I don't know exactly when that shifted. I think it only shifted when I went to college. I think through high school, that remained a kind of anxiety. And I'm hopeful that for this generation now, there's various forms of body positivity and a kind of acceptance and celebration of difference that I hope, really has permeated culture here. But I don't know. I have my doubts. I think there are various forms of bullying that still emerge for children. So,
but I think it's a really positive thing that most people have. The world's changed, right? So most people do have more exposure to different cultures and different people and different languages, and that can only be a good thing, I think.
Yeah, it's strange because in my school, growing up here in Dubai, we had 42 different nationalities. I feel so grateful that was never something that was on anyone's mind, I would hope, because we just had such a mix in class. There was, probably no more than 3 or 4 people from the same nationality. And then, there was such a good mix. That you're really grateful to grow up as a child in an environment like that, not even noticing what that's like, and then for me, hearing stories like this, I just I can imagine how difficult it must be for a young child. I want to ask you, Avni, one of my early memories because my aunt lives in the States, and we would go in the summers and we would spend a couple of months there as a family, our family and her family. And then that's when I learned about 4th of July. We would all go to this, I think it was like a football stadium. I can't remember now, but everybody would sit on the grass and picnics and just watch the fireworks. And it was just the most incredible atmosphere. I still remember it, even though I was really, really young. What is your favorite 4th of July memory?
Growing up, we used to go to South Street Seaport in New York, which is kind of all the way on the sort of the southmost tip of Manhattan. and you could like just hang out there, eat junk food, and watch fireworks. And I just remember being able to eat as much junk as I wanted, like ice cream and whatever I wanted, with, you know, every color of sprinkles on top. And we used to watch fireworks, and I just remember the excitement of it. And then, I mean, I also have other memories, like more recent ones, where, you know, in the past, I would say, however many years, my mom has always done like a really nice, like a late lunch, early dinner at home. And my parents have a beautiful house on in New Jersey, on this cliff looking over the Hudson River. And so we'll kind of have this delicious meal cooked by my mom, and then we'll sit on their terrace and watch the fireworks from home, which we can only kind of see in the distance. But there's something, I think, before, you know, for me, all of these experiences are always so deeply connected to food. And it's interesting because I think when I was young, I just wanted that like junk food. And now that was sort of comforting to me. And now the comfort is in eating like all the food that my mom makes that I don't really get to eat, you know, in Dubai. And so there's something really comforting about just being at home and just looking out from their terrace and seeing that view that I kind of grew up with. And so that feels very American to me now, I guess.
Amazing. Well, you'll have to send us pictures this year. We want to see what it looks like.
I will do, definitely.
And in the meantime, I think we should all celebrate the 4th of July with the best food we can lay our hands on.
Sounds like a plan.
And that is all we have for you today. There are so many great writers in and from the US, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where you find the world's largest publishing industry as well. If you want more recommendations, you can head over to our blog where we're celebrating the new great American novels. That's blog.elfdubai.org. Like school, we are now also out for summer, but we'll be back with season 3 of the Boundless Book Club before you know it. Make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening so you get an alert when the next episode drops in September. Until then, we're hanging a large "Gone Fishing" sign on the door. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Bye.